So the early fall period of the year can be a really tough time of year, and you have to have baits that are really versatile because we all rely on junk fishing. It's hard to travel with a pattern, and you end up fishing a lot of different types of cover in a given day. And so having baits that are extremely versatile is key. And one of the baits that I reach for most often is going to be a swim jig for a lot of reasons. And today I'm going to break down all of those reasons, what I do with the swim jig, and at the end of the video I'm going to break down how I fish it in a couple ways that are going to really surprise you. So stay around for that, because how I fish this swim jig really, I think, gets me a whole lot more bites than the majority of people. So stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. So fall is particularly a junk fishing time of year. It's really hard to follow a pattern because there's so many fish spread out throughout the entire lake system. As far as you have deep fish still, you have a lot of fish shallow, so it makes it very difficult to try to pick out what you want to have laid out on the deck. And so for me personally, that's why I like to have baits that I have options with. A lot of times I'll have a chatterbait, spinner baits, swim baits, and a swim jig, because this little weed guard right here lets me throw this bait in whatever I want to throw it in. Whether I'm fishing in grass, whether I'm fishing around logs, rocks, doesn't really matter. I can put this bait wherever I want, and you can have a couple different weights. If you have this in a 1/2 and a 3/4, you can almost fish it around anything. I like to keep a 3/8 and a 3/4 on deck, because then I can fish extremely shallow cover with it, as well as fish it out deep. And also, by changing the color, I can go from fishing dirty water to fishing super clean water. And it also depends on the trailers that you put on it. You can imitate bluegills, shad, doesn't really matter. It's just extremely versatile, and that's what I absolutely love about it. One other thing that makes it really, really good is the fact that it has zero noise and just the vibration you get from this bait. And so what I mean by that is, this time of year is really, really hard because a lot of the community holes have been beat down. Whether it's grass, whether it's rock, it doesn't matter. A lot of these areas have just been beat down, and so your traditional baits, for the most part, don't really work as good. You know, your chatterbaits, your spinner baits, all the baits that I listed before, really, it's hard to fish them because those fish have heard it, they've seen it. You know, all the lipless crankbaits have a lot of the same rattle, same vibration, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits. They all feel the same to those fish and sound the same. So when you throw something that has none of that through an area, you're liable to get a few more bites and honestly catch some bigger fish because of that. Because this bait actually sneaks up on those bass because they can only barely feel the vibration as it comes through there, and they can't hear it. I particularly love throwing this around grass. That's probably one of my absolute favorite areas, grass and brush, because I can fish it through those areas in a way that nobody really has fished through there before me. Those fish can't hear it coming. It doesn't matter how thick the cover is, I can still get my bait through there. Whether I have to worm it through there or whether I can straight reel it through there, it doesn't really matter. I can still work my bait through there and potentially get some bigger bites. And so why it works so good this time of year is because you can change the trailers on it and get totally different actions in different environments. I kind of alluded to this earlier, where if I put a kicking style trailer on there, I like a Z-Man goat or a Z-Man helicross. Then I have a bluegill trailer if I'm fishing up shallow around grass. And if I also have a lot of shad coming up like we do right now, I can put a white swim bait on the back of it on a white swim jig, and all of a sudden I have a shad profile. And it actually adds a little bit of bulk to that, and then instead of having to try to throw a flashy swimmer or something that would get hung up in wood or a different type of swim bait, I can fish this swim jig in the thickest of thick cover, because these shad are starting to get super shallow up along the banks, super shallow into that grass, and there's honestly not a lot of great options when it comes to trying to fish for them in those areas other than fishing a swim jig. And so when I go down a bank, I can just put this in my hand and just make the same cast over and over again, no matter what the cover is, which is extremely beneficial for the angler as yourself. And so one of the things I like to talk about is how I fish this bait. So when you're fishing a swim jig, there's really two different ways you can go about fishing it. When I cast it out there, you can either straight reel it, which is what I like to do most of the time, or you can shake your rod tip and try to add more action into it. Or you can do something that works really, really well, is almost worm it through that grass. Just pick it up, pop it through, and let it swim back down. Because it's gonna look like a bluegill that's hopping in and out of holes in the grass. Or if you're around shad, you can throw a white one and get the shad imitation going on. But what I like to do this is when I've been around fish that I know I've been catching them on a swim bait or on a chatterbait or a topwater, and I know they're in that grass. And so you can see the different ways that I like to fish this, and it depends on where you're at and what the fish are responding to how I fish this bait. If I'm fishing a grass bed, a big grass flat, a lot of times I'm going to straight reel it, or I'm going to worm that bait through that grass, because it's going to be different retrieves that those fish probably haven't seen. Most oftentimes when people are fishing baits through grass, they're ripping it. That's, you know, it's a lipless, it's a spinner bait, it's a chatter bait, and it gets a lot of vibration, a lot of erratic kick, but they can feel and hear that bait coming much sooner than they actually see it. And so by casually reeling it, what's going to happen is it's going to catch grass on its own, and you can just pop it and break it free from that, which is super, super nice because you still get the reaction strike that you want, but you don't have to really overwork the bait or do anything crazy for it. That's also why I like to worm the bait through those grass areas, because as I throw it out in there, that bait's just going to go up and go down, and you're going to get the natural kick of your trailer, and you're going to be able to cover that water in a way that those fish really haven't seen it. And it's going to be a bulky bait, so you're still going to have the opportunity at big bites, but it's just going to be a way that those fish in those grass beds aren't used to seeing a bait of this size and this magnitude coming through there. They're used to it going over their heads, not falling in their lap. And so we all know how much retrieval change can really benefit you, and that's one of the benefits that it has in those grass beds with all those fish that are still there but extremely pressured. Now, another retrieve that guys really like to do is what I call the Alabama shake, where you see those guys just working that rod tip and getting it bouncing and that swim jig's just coming through there. You can either do that or change your trailer to have that kick to it, but I'm only going to do that around shallow cover. Because the reason I like to do it around shallow cover is those fish, when they get shallow, is they're feeding. And what I'm trying to do is just cause a reaction and make a disturbance that those fish are going to understand that bait's there, and they're going to come over and eat it. And so a lot of guys like to use a straight chunk trailer on the back of this. If you're going to do that shake and you love shaking that rod tip, that's what I would use, is a chunk style trailer. So that way you put the action into those chunks and those flaps will be back there just kicking. Or for those of you guys that don't like to do that shake, I will just put like a Z-Man goat like I talked about earlier, a Rage Craw, a Z-Man Hella Craw, something that already has that kick as soon as you pull it through the water. That's the way I like to go, because it's less work for me. And then when those fish eat it, there's less chance they're going to miss it because I'm shaking it. I mean, how many times do you see those guys shaking that rod and they go, oh, one just ate it, but they missed it because right as that fish went to eat it, they shook it, and it just doesn't work out right. So when I'm reeling that bait and bouncing it through there, you know, naturally through the cover, I have a better chance at those high hookups. That kind of leads me to the gear that I'm going to throw this on. There's a couple different setups, and the one setup that I really love is the rod and the reel that I throw this bait on. So I like to throw this bait on my chatterbait rod from Arc that you guys have seen in any of these other videos that you've watched. It's a 7.4 Invoker Pro. I will have it linked down below with everything else. That 7.4 Invoker Pro medium heavy moderate action. It's a graphite cranking rod, but it just does such a phenomenal job because it has a soft tip but a stiff backbone that really allows those fish to come up and just fully get that bait before you feel it. And so when you hook them, you have every one of them in the back of the mouth, and you do not lose fish. I like a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel for that. I use an Arc G5 reel. And the reason I like that 7-to-1 is because I don't overwork that bait. I don't like an 8-1-to-1 because once you get around that realm, I feel like I overwork the bait and I fish it too fast. And that's something that I see guys do a lot. And so that's something you need to be aware of. Now, the line is the only thing that changes in my setup. If I'm fishing around really thick grass, I will go to 30 to 50 pound braid, depending on how thick the grass is. If I'm fishing more open water cover, I'll go 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. Or if I'm fishing sparse grass, I will just go 15 pound fluorocarbon to help get that bait a little bit deeper. But that's the only thing that's really going to change in my swim jig setup, is just that line, because everything else really stays the same. I might go to a 7.4 heavy if I'm fishing around really thick grass, like down in Florida when I have the shot at an absolute giant. But other than that, nothing really changes with that setup. And so one place that a swim jig really excels is around docks. And so if you learned a lot in today's video and you want to learn a little bit more about how I break down docks, I'm going to have a video linked up here where I show you how to break down docks and how to catch more fish on docks than you probably ever have or have ever thought about. So go ahead and check that one out. Smash that subscribe button to follow on with the content. But God bless. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.